So Hawwa was asked, how do you feel as a South Asian person in the classroom?
So this is a very strange question because I think my feelings have changed throughout my time at university. At the beginning, it was very, very isolating because I can still literally count on my hands how many people of color were on my course in the whole 3 years, not just my year. Um, so I often felt a kind of weird imposter syndrome of, am I supposed to be here? Like, why is no one else around me the same as me or thinking the same as me? Even if we were different in ethnicity or race or whatever, I still had very different opinions to the history that we were being taught. And it was often quite frustrating as well when I would be one of the only people of color in my course or my module. And we would discuss issues like race and discrimination in a module. And the white British students would talk about it as if they would talk very authoritatively, as if they knew exactly what they were saying. Their points were more valid than mine. They would speak over me. And I would just sit there thinking, like, I have the lived experience here, but you're literally speaking over me, telling me how to pronounce words that are literally from my culture. So yeah, it was very isolating at the beginning. And it was like kind of the small things that would make me uncomfortable, where like a tutor would mention a piece of South Asian history or like a South Asian person, and everyone would just look at me and I'm like I don't know every single South Asian in the world. Like, I'm sorry, just because I'm brown doesn't mean I know everything about South Asian history. But I think as I got used to it, I sort of started to feel more empowered by the fact that I was the only person of color on my course or my module. And it was sort of like, okay, this is a very white space. I can either like inhabit it and like be present in the space like really uncomfortably and feel frustrated about things, or I can try and speak about it and talk about it and go talk to my teachers about, okay, I want to study this from this course. I know it's technically not on the handbook, but I don't want to just do like really Eurocentric history all the time. Can I do something else? And I felt like I sort of had a duty to speak about it, because I felt like if I was one of the only people of color on the module and I didn't say anything, then who else was going to say something? So yeah, like I'm never very quiet about how frustrated I am by the whitewash curriculum. Like, I'm constantly shouting about it all the time, but I feel like if like I don't do that, then I don't hear anyone else doing about it on my course. Like, even now I've left, some of my friends are still talking to their departments about how they can change the curriculum because of how they felt when they were studying. So I think it can be very frustrating at the beginning, but once you get used to it, you can feel empowered by the fact that you are taking up a space that people around you that look like you aren't, and you can try and change that and make sure that maybe more people will come to history if they know that they're not just going to be taught British history the whole time. But
yeah, that is really like interesting to hear like of your experience, and I think it's widely felt by a lot of people, being the only Asian person in a classroom or being the only brown person in a classroom. I'd just like to add to that, I obviously went to a predominantly white school and it was Christian as well, so I was the only brown Muslim girl in year 7 at the time. And obviously as the years went by, I think we had a few more black students and maybe another Asian student, but I remember being in the classroom and my white peers telling me either about my own history or telling me that certain stories about history, rather than just sort of listening to my perspective. So I remember one time we were learning about influential figures during like the civil rights movement in RS, and the typical leaders came up like MLK, Rosa Parks, and Gandhi. So obviously, like, I know Gandhi's supposed to be like a spokesperson for all Indians or something, or all South Asian people, but in reality, I don't think that's the case. And obviously, because I'd done some self-research myself, I'd realised that Gandhi wasn't as pristine as like most people think he is. And I brought up that I think Gandhi was quite anti-black and that he was racist. And once I mentioned this, like everyone just seemed really confused and didn't really like comprehend what I was saying. And I remember one of the girls in the class, who was obviously white, turned around to me and was like, "You don't know that Gandhi's not a racist. Like, how can he be anti-black? Like, he's brown himself." I was like, "I've done my research. Like, he did not support black people and he didn't care for like the civil rights movement in the US." And I remember saying this to my teacher at the time, who was also white, and my teacher just didn't really have anything to say. Like, I remember her just sort of telling me that, oh, we just have to like focus on like the positive aspects of any leaders that we get taught about. And I just think like we're being taught a snapshot then. We're being taught this like this rose-tinted view of people, expecting us students to glorify these people like, oh wow, Gandhi was amazing for India, because like for us, for India's self-rule. But once I brought up any sort of criticism, I was sort of shut down, and like shut down by my white peers when they're not even Asian themselves, like, and they didn't take the time to even listen. And I just think, you know, that's a universal feeling for many South Asian students. Like, we feel like we don't have that voice because we're surrounded by so many, you know, white people. It almost makes us feel uncomfortable talking about our own history, but then we realize like, no, we can't sort of back down. We should be able to be vocal about our own history. So in the next RS lesson, best believe I started talking about my own history and other history, because I realized like, you know, my history is just as important as theirs. And if I can do my own part by adding like 2 pence in about certain parts of history, or certain figures that aren't just the typical figures of that time, then I will do, because that's like my way of, you know, educating others as well.
I wanted to add as well, like, you know, you mentioned about listening and how they weren't really listening to what you had to say. I think there's like a weird, like, for example, in my course, there was either the students that would speak over me, or there was the ones that would expect me to know everything about anything related to South Asia. So there's this weird pressure of either no one's going to listen to anything you say, regardless of whether it's true or not, or how much you've researched about it, or you then feel like you can't really say anything unless you know every aspect of that piece of history that you want to talk about, because
Exactly.
otherwise I'll look at you like, oh, how come you don't know? It's your history and you don't know anything, and why are you saying something? Why don't we just listen to someone else?
Mm-hmm.
So in both senses, you sort of feel like you don't want to speak,
Yeah.
because either you're not going to be heard, or you're going to seem really unarticulate and unintelligent because you don't know like every single fact going.
Yeah.
So it's like a weird thing of where you have to sort of balance what you say and how you say it and who you say it to, which I feel like shouldn't happen, because I know for a fact that the students in my class that weren't South Asian had way more confidence to speak about anything, regardless of how much experience or research they knew about, in comparison to my friends who were all people of colour. So yeah, I think that's really sad, but hopefully it changes if teachers change. I feel like the teacher has to make that environment, because
Yeah.
I knew the more in the seminars I did speak up, it was because my tutors were like really welcoming and made a really safe environment, and you felt like you would be heard regardless of what you said. And in the ones where I didn't necessarily speak much, it was because I just felt really uncomfortable, and I would just sit at the back and like wait for the 2 hours to pass and then just leave. So yeah.
I
Okay.
totally agree with what you just said. And Roheema, I just want to say I wish I'd taught you, because you're
Oh,
exactly the kind of
thanks.
students. You're exactly the kind of students that I think Sam will probably agree that we want students to be critical thinkers. And that's exactly what you're saying, you know, is that you heard Gandhi and put two and two together and thought, this is a strange, you know, that you thought, I know more context than everyone else, and you questioned it. And it reminds me of, obviously, VE Day was during lockdown in May. And so I had organised all of this stuff at school to commemorate VE Day and everything. And I did a virtual assembly for all the students. And in my assembly, I had a slide that had all the different types of people that contributed to Britain's victory in the war. So you had, women from Jamaica, you had Indian soldiers, you had all these different people. And the point that I made was, look, the people that contributed to VE Day are exactly like the students in our school. And then it was really interesting because the days after VE Day, I had so many messages and emails from students saying, Miss, why did we not see this on TV? Why is it that in your assembly you talked about all these different people,
Yeah.
like the Indians that contributed hugely to the war, you know, soldiers from Africa, various people from the Caribbean, etc. And them sending me those messages. It makes you sad that they didn't see that reflected in the mainstream media, but in a bigger way, it made me feel so proud that that's exactly what we want. We want the students to be able to look at what they're being fed in the mainstream and criticize it and think, actually, no, I know better than that. You know, I know more, I've learned more at school, and I know better than actually what I'm seeing on the TV. So you're absolutely right that it is, and I think it is down to teachers, and I know Salma, you said that as well, that it is down to teachers to encourage students to question you know, question what they're being taught not only in school, but also what they're seeing about history and about representation in the media as well. So I think it's really, 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 really important.
Yeah.
Can I just add to that? I just wanted to say, like, as a teacher, if you're you know, putting somebody of colour or a South Asian person within your curriculum, really thinking about who it is that you're putting, so not just going for, you know, Gandhi or Martin Luther King, really thinking about the impact that that person is going to have on your students. So if you asked students today to name a South Asian woman who was influential, I think a lot of students would say Malala, because I've seen her on you know, on lots of different curriculums, and I think she's a fantastic figure. But then I think about the story that she comes from, and I think she is an amazing character, but she reinforces that idea of the oppressed South Asian woman who had to escape from her homeland, come to Britain and be freed. So for me, I just think, fine, if you're going to have Malala on your curriculum, that's fine, but then which other South Asian woman have you got to balance that? Because there are so many that you can have which show that South Asian women are not oppressed, and, you know, they're not silenced at all times. So if you're having Malala on your curriculum, how are you going to balance that? And I think that's where the teacher is responsible. So you have to really come out of your comfort zone and go out and research, strengthen your own subject knowledge to ensure that the person that you're presenting to students has a positive impact on them. So not doing it superficially, like, I think it's really important to do it meaningfully.